Today's draft legislation is the culmination of the House Committee on Natural Resources efforts this Congress to advance innovative solutions to increase the pace and scale of forest management, protect vulnerable communities from catastrophic wildfire, and restore health and resiliency to our nation's ailing forests and federal lands. Our committee has dedicated considerable time this Congress to examining this historical crisis, which has torched millions of acres, destroyed lives and communities, charred wildlife habitat beyond repair, and degraded our air and water quality. We have heard from experts and stakeholders, both here in D.C. and at home, and have considered many individual pieces of legislation that form the basis of the comprehensive solution before us today. The overwhelming message that we have heard is that the removal of active forest management from our forests has caused this mess, and our present efforts to reverse the awful trajectory are not working. Despite historic levels of spending to try to address this crisis, the simple fact remains that not enough work is being done on the ground at the pace or scale that is truly needed. We know what needs to be done to fix this problem, and the important tools provided by this discussion draft would enable the Forest Service to immediately begin treatment work on millions of acres of fire-prone federal lands. This legislation will empower streamlined forest management projects to take place on a landscape scale in the areas at the highest risk for catastrophic wildfire. Across the country, over 1 billion acres of land, billion with a B, are at risk of wildfire. We need to prioritize forest management projects in the areas with the highest risks to communities and watersheds, or where the risk of severe fire is so great that there may be forest conversion. That's exactly what this legislation does. We have heard time and time again that the Forest Service doesn't need any new streamlined authorities and simply needs to use the tools the agency already has. Again, this bill does exactly that by mandating the use of streamlined authorities such as existing categorical exclusions. The bill also further incentivizes collaboration with state and tribal governments by removing inflexible requirements that limit categorical exclusions to a paltry 3,000 acres when those authorities are used in collaboration with a state governor or Indian tribe. With more than 117 million acres of federal lands at high risk of catastrophic wildfire, we cannot afford to only be taking 3,000 acre bites at the apple at a time. I'd like to highlight several of my priorities that are included in this discussion draft. First, in recognition of the size and scope of this crisis cannot be tackled alone, this discussion draft includes several provisions that will encourage coordination and empower cross-boundary forest management with states, tribes, counties, and other stakeholders. This includes providing full partnership to tribes and counties under Good Neighbor Authority, a very successful forest management tool used in Wisconsin. Second, the bill supports the forest products industry by codifying the 20-year stewardship contracting and raising minimum threshold for advertising competitive timber sales. Since 2000, over 1,500 sawmills have closed or significantly curtailed operations across the country. In western states with large footprints of federal land, the lack of reliable timber coming from federal forests is consistently cited as a reason for these closures and curtailments. Just a few days ago, another sawmill operating in South Dakota announced 50 workers would be laid off as a direct result of reductions to the Black Hills National Forest Timber Sale Program. We know from experience that once we lose a mill, that infrastructure is gone. That locks us into a vicious cycle where federal forests go unmanaged and catastrophic wildfires are allowed to wreak absolute havoc on these landscapes. Don't take my word for it. Just last week, Forest Service Chief Randy Moore told the Senate Appropriations Committee during a budget hearing that I can tell you with certainty, if we do not have a vibrant timber industry, we're not going to be able to manage our forests and make them healthy and resilient. Third, this bill also addresses obstructionist litigation, which remains a major hindrance to active forest management efforts. In the last decade, lawsuits seeking to block forest management projects have tied up roughly 1.8 billion board feet of timber. This proposal includes a permanent fix to the disastrous Cottonwood decision, which has been one of the most common sources of litigation blocking forest management. Finally, this discussion draft will foster greater transparency and accountability from our federal land managers. I'm pleased that my legislation, the Acres Act, is included in this bill. This provision will require land managers to produce yearly hazardous fuels reduction reports based on the actual number of acres that they treated over the past year without double counting any acreage.